USP Marion, America's first Supermax and its psychological impact. Imagine being trapped in a prison so isolated, so controlled, that even the sound of another human voice becomes a rare and precious memory. A place designed not just to punish, but to break the mind. This was USP Marion, America's first Supermax prison. The place where solitary confinement wasn't just a sentence, it was an experiment. And the effects would shock the nation. Stay with us as we uncover the chilling history, the psychological toll, and the secrets behind the prison that would redefine incarceration in America forever. If you're intrigued by the hidden world inside ADX Florence, make sure to hit like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to follow this journey through the mental effects of solitary confinement prison in America. This documentary contains descriptions of prison conditions and violence for educational purposes. Viewer discretion is advised. The birth of the Supermax. In 1983, USP Marion, located in the small town of Marion, Illinois, became the first federal prison to implement what would later be known as the Supermax model. This wasn't just another maximum security prison. It was an entirely new approach to handling the nation's most dangerous inmates. The prison had gained a reputation for violence, including assaults on guards and inmates. In response, the Bureau of Prisons made a bold and unprecedented decision to lock down the entire facility. Every prisoner was confined to their cell for 23 hours a day. Communication between inmates was nearly eliminated. The goal? Total control. Officers called it the Marion experiment. Some officials described it as a necessary step to protect both staff and inmates. But critics warned of a darker truth. Isolating human beings for prolonged periods could lead to devastating psychological consequences. The legal challenge soon followed. In the case of Briskino versus Carlson, the conditions at Marion were put under federal scrutiny. Inmates described severe anxiety, hallucinations, and an overwhelming sense of despair. The court recognized the extraordinary nature of the confinement, but stopped short of calling it unconstitutional. This was the start of a debate that would rage for decades. But what happened inside those walls wasn't just policy, it was science in action. And Marion would become the blueprint for Supermax prisons across the United States. The effects of Marion's lockdown weren't limited to one prison. Its model spread like wildfire. While the Bureau of Prisons touted success in reducing violence, inmates and psychologists told a different story, one of trauma, mental breakdown, and the unseen cost of isolation. Next, we dive deep into the psychological impact of life inside America's first Supermax. Watch as we reveal the human cost of the Marion experiment. The psychological toll. Inside Marion, time seemed to stretch endlessly. Inmates were confined to tiny cells, often just 7 by 12 feet, with nothing but a bed, a toilet, and a sink. They were allowed out for 1 hour a day, alone. No conversation, no contact with others, no distractions beyond a small TV or books. The silence was suffocating. Psychologists who studied Marion reported alarming effects. Many inmates began to experience extreme anxiety, paranoia, and depression. Some reported hallucinations, seeing shadows, hearing voices, feeling like someone was constantly watching. Sleep became nearly impossible. Some prisoners refused to eat, while others developed obsessive behaviors just to maintain a sense of control over their lives. The Bureau of Prisons claimed these measures reduced violence within the prison. And statistically, assaults on guards did decline. But at what cost? The human mind is not designed for isolation. Prolonged solitary confinement began to create a generation of mentally fractured men. Letters from inmates painted a harrowing picture: despair, anger, and a sense of losing one's very identity. One former inmate recalled, "You start talking to yourself, then you start answering yourself, then you forget what's real." Another wrote about the fear that even if released, he might never recover from the mental toll. These weren't isolated cases, they were systemic. The very structure of Marion was designed to push human beings to the brink. The psychological damage didn't stay hidden for long. In the Chicago Tribune's investigative series, journalists detailed first-hand accounts of emotional breakdowns, panic attacks, and inmates who had to be transferred to psychiatric units simply to survive. The media dubbed it the Marion experiment, highlighting the moral and ethical questions raised by the prison's approach. Some correctional officers admitted that even staff felt the strain. Working in an environment where every movement is controlled, every interaction monitored, and every sound magnified created a constant tension. The walls of Marion didn't just confine the inmates, they confined everyone inside the prison's perimeter. Marion's national legacy and the spread of Supermax prisons. In the years following the 1983 lockdown, USP Marion became a case study for federal and state prison systems across the United States. The Bureau of Prisons promoted Marion as a successful model for handling high-risk inmates. Reports from the time showed a clear reduction in inmate-on-inmate and inmate-on-staff violence, which administrators argued justified the extreme isolation measures. By the late 1980s, other federal facilities began adopting similar control units, and the term Supermax entered the official correctional vocabulary. Studies, including Daniel Mears' 2006 report for the Urban Institute, noted that Marion's methods, strict lockdowns, minimal human interaction, and constant surveillance were replicated in prisons in Florence, Colorado, and ADX in Colorado, which would later become known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. However, the Marion model also raised serious questions about the long-term effects of isolation on inmates' mental health. Briskino v. Carlson, 1988, highlighted some of these concerns. The court reviewed evidence that inmates experienced anxiety, emotional distress, and behavioral changes due to prolonged solitary confinement. While the court ultimately did not declare the practices unconstitutional, the case became a cornerstone in legal debates over the limits of isolation in U.S. prisons. Investigative reporting, particularly the Chicago Tribune's Marion Experiment series, emphasized the human impact behind the statistics. Journalists documented that some inmates required psychiatric intervention during or after their time in isolation. The reporting prompted both public and scholarly discussion about the ethics of Supermax confinement. Academic research, such as the 2003 article in the Prison Journal, later analyzed Marion's influence on correctional policy nationwide, showing that by the early 2000s, Supermax-style units existed in nearly every state. Marion's legacy is complex. On one hand, it represented innovation in prison management, successfully reducing violence and containing the most dangerous inmates. On the other hand, it sparked an ongoing debate about the balance between security and human rights, particularly regarding mental health. Experts now study Marion not only as a historical milestone but as a cautionary tale about the psychological consequences of extreme isolation. As the Supermax model spread across the country, the lessons of Marion influenced policy, legal oversight, and public perception of incarceration. The prison story remains central to understanding the modern era of high-security confinement in the United States. The human and policy consequences of Supermax confinement. The establishment of USP Marion marked a turning point in American corrections, but its impact extended far beyond one facility. Researchers and policymakers began examining not just whether Supermax prisons reduced violence, but what effects extreme isolation had on the human mind. Daniel Mears' 2006 study for the Urban Institute highlighted the psychological and behavioral consequences of prolonged solitary confinement. Inmates placed in control units at Marion exhibited higher rates of anxiety, depression, and emotional dysregulation than those in general population units. Some developed difficulties with social interaction, even after release from isolation. While the Supermax model improved operational control, it created a new set of challenges for prison administrators: how to maintain safety while addressing the mental health needs of the population. Legal scrutiny continued after the Briskino v. Carlson case. Federal courts acknowledged that prolonged isolation could be harmful, and the ruling emphasized the importance of monitoring inmate welfare, even in high-security settings. Subsequent legal challenges in other jurisdictions drew upon Marion as a precedent, ensuring that Supermax policies were closely evaluated for compliance with constitutional standards. Investigative reporting, such as the Chicago Tribune's Marion experiment, documented how inmates experienced the extreme environment. While some inmates adapted to isolation, many required psychiatric attention. These reports spurred debate about whether the practices were ethical or sustainable. Policy discussions increasingly focused on implementing mental health screenings, structured programs, and limits on the duration of solitary confinement. The ripple effects of Marion were nationwide. States began designing their own Supermax units, often directly inspired by the Marion model. By the 1990s, nearly every state prison system had incorporated some form of administrative segregation or Supermax facility. Research in the Prison Journal, 2003, showed that while these units succeeded in controlling violence, they also contributed to long-term psychological strain among inmates, raising ongoing ethical and legal questions. USP Marion's legacy is therefore twofold. Operationally, it demonstrated that high-risk inmates could be safely contained. Psychologically and socially, it exposed the limits of isolation as a tool for punishment. The debate continues today: how to balance safety, security, and the humane treatment of prisoners. Marion remains the touchstone for these discussions, serving as both a model and a cautionary tale. Modern reflections and the ongoing debate. USP Marion's creation and its Supermax model left a lasting imprint on the American prison system. By the 2000s, Marion had closed its original control unit after decades of scrutiny, but its legacy remained. Researchers, legal scholars, and policymakers continued to study its influence on both inmate safety and mental health outcomes. Studies confirmed that while Supermax units like Marion reduced assaults on staff and other inmates, the psychological toll was significant. Prolonged isolation could lead to anxiety, depression, hallucinations, and difficulties reintegrating into the general population. Daniel Mears' Urban Institute research reinforced that these effects were systematic, not anecdotal, demonstrating a clear correlation between solitary confinement and mental health decline. Legal and ethical debates persisted. Courts increasingly examined the balance between safety and humane treatment. Cases inspired by Marion's example have prompted policies requiring regular mental health evaluations, limits on the duration of isolation, and opportunities for structured social interaction. The lessons of Briskino versus Carlson, 1988, continue to influence judicial scrutiny over extreme confinement practices. At the same time, correctional agencies have attempted reforms. Some Supermax facilities have implemented structured programs, such as educational opportunities, mental health counseling, and limited social activities, designed to mitigate the harmful effects of isolation. The goal is to maintain safety while reducing the long-term psychological impact that Marion so starkly revealed. Marion also shaped public perception. Investigative journalism, including the Chicago Tribune's reporting, helped raise awareness of the unseen consequences of extreme incarceration. The prison became a symbol in the debate over whether the United States' approach to the most dangerous offenders prioritizes security at the cost of human dignity. Today, USP Marion stands as both a historical milestone and a cautionary tale. It demonstrated the operational benefits of Supermax confinement but also exposed the profound ethical and psychological costs. Policymakers, correctional officers, and researchers continue to study Marion's legacy. USP Marion was more than just a prison. It was a turning point in the history of incarceration in the United States. The first Supermax facility showed how extreme measures could reduce violence, but it also revealed the profound psychological toll of isolation. For decades, Marion has been studied, debated, and remembered as both a model and a warning. What do you think? Is the Supermax model a necessary tool for prison safety, or does it go too far at the expense of mental health? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, hit that like button and subscribe for more in-depth looks at America's most infamous prisons and the people behind the bars.